So the warm demander approach isn't something that's brand new. In fact, the term was coined way back in 1975 by Judith Klenfield. It's an equity approach. It's grounded in showing students that you care and that you refuse to give up on their achievement. Being a warm demander is about mutual respect and making it clear from your tone and body language that student effort is non-negotiable and that you believe in students' ability to succeed. A warm demander builds trust in relationships by listening to kids and affirming them. Yet, a teacher who takes the warm demander stance also pushes kids and doesn't allow them to settle for less than they're capable of. There's a lot of research out there about what it means to be a warm demander and how that approach helps kids, particularly kids of color and kids in underserved communities, how it helps them be successful in the classroom. But what I'm hoping to add to the conversation with this episode is a more personal touch. What exactly does being a warm demander look like? What specifically do we mean by being warm? What's a healthy model of being demanding? I want to focus in this episode mostly on the demeanor of a teacher who is a warm demander, because I feel like that's the most nebulous part. Everyone knows to have high expectations for kids. Like you've heard develop relationships, teach kids to persevere when things are hard. We know all of this. But personally, I think the key to making those strategies work is really in your demeanor. It's how you communicate those expectations, how you communicate that care for your students through your tone, your facial expressions, your body language. I haven't seen as much written or shared about that online, so I thought it might be helpful to talk about what worked for me and a few of the other educators that I've learned from. So I want to give a disclaimer here right up front that I am not implying that you as the teacher bear full responsibility for getting kids to stay engaged and do their work. There are so many reasons that students fail to meet expectations, and a lot of those reasons have nothing to do with the teacher's rapport or personality or teaching style. So there's no implication here that if you execute this strategy perfectly, all your kids' disengagement and behavioral and learning issues will disappear. And if you don't execute this strategy perfectly, then there's no other effective way to teach. I'm just sharing something that has really worked for me. And I'll tell you why I like this approach. The warm demander stance is focused on something that you can control, your own behavior. It's not focused on manipulating or cajoling or rewarding or punishing students for their choices. Trying to control other people leads to frustration. Focusing on you is where the real power is at, because you can choose how you show up in the classroom each day. There's something very empowering about setting boundaries and limits to what you will accept from students, and then choosing to respond in a firm yet warm way when those limits are pushed. So let's talk a little bit about what is meant by the term warm when we talk about a warm demander. Warmth is something that will look different for each person depending on your personality type. I was a warm demander in the classroom, even though I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. I just knew that I could say what I needed firmly and say it with a smile on my face. Now, don't get me wrong, I could also be ice cold. There were many moments when I snapped, when I glared, the kids just pushed me too far and I lost my patience. I am a human, I'm not a robot. But my default demeanor was that of a warm demander. Here's how I developed that style. I had a professor in my undergraduate training. I wish I could remember her name and credit her for this, but she always smiled when she taught us. She would teach with a relatively straight face, but anytime she asked a question, she'd smile. And then she'd maintain that smile while waiting for a response and while listening to our answers. So she'd say something like, Piaget was a child development expert. Who can summarize his work for us? And she'd start smiling during the question. And she'd stand there just sort of beaming at us. The look on her face communicated, I can't wait to hear these answers. Someone is about to say something really good. A question sounds different when the person asking it is smiling. Could you tell I was smiling when I asked it? You could tell right now that I'm smiling, right? It changes the tone of your voice somehow. And your willingness to be vulnerable as a student and participate increases when the person who is asking you to participate is genuinely smiling at you. It was a really simple and yet profoundly effective way to demonstrate warmth and confidence in us as her students. And I really liked the way that it felt sitting there in her classroom, so I decided I was going to try it in my practicums. And I found that I really liked the way that it felt as the teacher as well. It changed my energy. It changed my perspective when I spent much of the day smiling at my students. And so that became a learned behavior. Anytime I'm teaching now, even when I'm teaching adults, I automatically smile a lot. I get excited by and energized by the responses of the people that I'm teaching, and I smile more broadly, or my eyes get big, my eyeballs raise, I'm nodding at them. The other nice thing about smiling is that it makes that wait time when you ask a student a question, it makes the wait time less awkward. You're not just standing there sort of staring the kids down and like daring someone to answer. When I ask a question and I don't get an immediate response, I'll often just sit on a tall stool that I usually keep behind me when I'm teaching, and I just sort of settle in. I'll keep smiling, I'll keep looking around the room, and just sort of communicate with my facial expression that I know you have something to say, and it's worth waiting for. I'm not going to answer my own question, I'm not going to give you a hint, I'm not going to rush this. I'm just going to let you think, because I have confidence in you, and I know you'll be able to answer this. Think about it, and I'll be ready whenever you are. I'm communicating all of that basically just with my facial expression and with the eye contact that I'm making with students as I'm looking around the room. Now, smiling may not really fit your personality type, and that's just one way to communicate warmth. I'm certainly not telling you to smile more if that's not something that you want to do or that feels good to you. Other ways to communicate warmth could be with playful jokes, or inside jokes that you've created with the class, and other forms of humor. I know teachers with rather serious personalities who occasionally crack a sarcastic comment or sort of poke fun at themselves or mutter something that is really hilarious under their breath. And it does so much to communicate to kids the teacher enjoys being there and finds some fun in the job, finds fun in the interactions with them. So if you're thinking, I'm not really a smiler, and I'm not really into humor, I'm not really sure what warmth looks like for me, maybe consider the opposite of that. Think about, what does coldness look like? Have you ever had someone tell you to do something or try to teach you something in a really cold demeanor, in a really cold way? Maybe there was like a customer service rep or a server at a restaurant who was extremely cold while they were supposedly helping you. Think about that. What did that coldness look like? They probably either avoided eye contact or stared you down with like this stone face and made you feel uncomfortable while they waited for you to make a decision or to act on what they said. Their tone of voice was probably dispassionate or maybe condescending. It's just sort of conveying that they didn't think you were capable of doing what needed to be done, or they were, impatient with your questions. They may have sighed. They may have seemed disinterested in helping you. That's coldness. And everyone dislikes being treated coldly. So watch out for those habits in your teaching and look for ways to be authentically warm with students. Think about smiling, using humor, being a little silly, a little crazy. Whatever it is, a warm person lets their real personality shine through. When you think about warm interactions you've had with other people, just going about your daily life, it's usually someone who tried to make an actual connection with you and wasn't just going through the motions with no feeling, right? Not just trying to rush you through, get away from you, get things done, and move on with their day. Someone who was actually really present with you and engaged and being themselves and letting you be themselves. That's what warmth really feels like. So think about how you treat the people that you really like. That's warmness for you. And practice incorporating more of those types of behaviors into your teaching until they feel like second nature. Now, this is easier when you develop an unconditional positive regard. That's a term that was coined by psychologist Carl Rogers. It has to do with accepting and supporting a person regardless of what that person says or does. So unconditional positive regard doesn't mean that you like or accept inappropriate behavior. It means that you accept and support the person regardless of what they say and do. You don't require them to change in order for you to acknowledge their positive characteristics or to have a positive relationship with them. Unconditional positive regard is a great thing to look up if you're not familiar with it. And I encourage you to start by developing that attitude toward yourself. When you can let go of judgments and labels about who you are, it's easier to extend that same grace to others. Practice accepting yourself just as you are without beating yourself up about your shortcomings and your mistakes. Change the way that you treat yourself, and that will naturally impact the way you treat your students. So that's the warmth part. Let's talk now about the demander part, which I think can be a little bit trickier to nail down. The demander part for me manifested in not letting kids off the hook. There were times when I could tell that I needed to let something go, of course, and not push them too hard. But in general, if a student said, I don't know, or was really struggling to answer a question, I didn't let up. I'd keep smiling, nod encouragingly, and ask follow-up questions. Sometimes I'd ask a smaller, easier question and use that as a springboard. So let's say the student couldn't answer 14 times 5. And I'd ask, okay, what's the first step in the problem? And if the student couldn't answer that, then I'd say, well, if you multiply the digits in the ones place, 4 times 5, what do you get? And if the student was able to say 20, my eyes would light up, I'd nod vigorously, yes, that's it. Would you like to tell me the next step? Or do you want to call on someone else to help you? The student can then use this scaffolding to help them solve or to ask a friend for help. And either way, she or he still has that decision-making power and, doesn't lose face. So that's just one small example of what being a warm demander might look like. My students knew they couldn't just say, I don't know, and have me move on to someone else. I was going to stick with them until they experienced some degree of success. And I would likely come back to them later in the lesson and ask a similar question, this time requiring them to stick with the answer and keep trying to problem solve until they got it right. Providing the support that students need to be successful is a major component of being a warm demander. So you're not just believing that kids can be successful. You're not just telling them failure is not an option. You're noticing what they need to meet the standards, and you're coming alongside them to offer resources and different approaches to the learning which could help them. Now, when it came to behavior, being a warm demander for me meant issuing reminders and initial corrections with a smile, or at least with a friendly-ish kind of tone. And then when a student pushed the limits too far, the smile disappeared, and I got very serious. Immediately after issuing the firm correction, I'd go right back to being warm with the rest of the class. Now, this was a strategy that I learned from the director of the Head Start program in my first public school teaching job. Her name was Afia Graham. And Afia came in and taught a model lesson during my first month of teaching. I was brand new. And I was watching her as she read a book to my students, and they were sitting on the rug. These are like 4-year-olds. So one of the kids started calling out during the read aloud, which is what 4-year-olds do. And Afia made eye contact with the corners of her mouth turned up. So she sort of communicated, not really feeling that behavior, like that face. And she shook her head just really briefly to let him know that wasn't okay. And then she looked back at the book. When he didn't stop interrupting, she whipped her head over in his direction, and she stopped reading mid-sentence. And he froze. He realized she'd stopped reading the story, and she was clearly not happy. The moment he was silent, she turned back to the book, and she kept reading in her warm, happy way. This process repeated all throughout the lesson, but it worked. She would give a gentle or a playful reminder, could be verbal, could be nonverbal, the very first time that the expectation wasn't met. And then she would follow up swiftly with a very serious look or a reprimand for repeated misbehavior. So when I first tried this approach, which was like immediately after she left my room that day because I thought it was really cool, honestly, I felt like I had multiple personalities. I was sort of switching back and forth from lighthearted to serious, lighthearted, serious, just in the course of a couple seconds. But the kids responded really well. I mean, it wasn't fun for them if I got serious or mean with one child and then carried that attitude over into my interactions with everyone else. They wanted their happy, fun-loving teacher, and they deserved to have that. And I deserve to be my best self. I don't want to carry around a grudge or annoyance. Like, yeah, I just had to, get kind of in this kid's face over here, and now I have to be in a bad mood for the rest of the lesson. I don't want to spend my time like that. So that switching became quickly really part of my teaching style. And I still do this to this current day. Even if I'm teaching model lessons in a middle or a high school, I use this strategy. I am warm and pleasant and smiling, but the moment they try to push the boundaries, I have this cold as ice look that tells students I am not playing with them. And I have a cold as ice voice that communicates that same exact thing. I'll address whatever's happening and then instantly turn back to the rest of the class with warmth and enthusiasm and focus on whatever it was that I was saying or doing before. And I found that this approach is really very disarming to teenagers, and therefore it's very effective for me. It shows a sense of unflappability, that I'm not going to let a handful of kids ruin my lesson or throw me off track or cause me to get impatient with everybody. I'm directing the coldness to where it's warranted, and I'm sufficiently in charge of my emotions to switch back to my natural warm state immediately afterwards. So these are just a couple examples of the demander portion of the warm demander approach. As I mentioned up front, there's not one right way to do this, and there's no method that's foolproof or guaranteed to work with every student. It really takes experimentation to find an approach that works for you and that's authentic to your personality. And it can also take experimentation to find something that's appropriate for your students. Being culturally responsive is a critical part of being a warm demander because our beliefs about what constitutes both warmth and demanding behaviors are based on our own personal and cultural norms. What's considered playful to you might be considered disrespectful to some of your students. And vice versa. You might consider something disrespectful that they find playful. What you see as being appropriately demanding might be perceived by some students as aggressive. Or what you see as being warm, like making sustained eye contact, might be perceived by some kids as really uncomfortable or maybe disrespectful. So being aware of this and monitoring your students' reactions is really key. Get curious about their responses to you rather than being judgmental. You don't have to label your attempts or their reactions as right or wrong, good or bad. Just notice what's effective and what doesn't get a great response. Probe into those reactions a little bit more. What made this one instance work? Why did this other thing over here that I tried completely bomb? Let your kids know when you mess up. It's okay to let them know, I tried that. I feel like I was a little too harsh in this situation, or I feel like I overreacted in this situation. If you behave in ways that you're not comfortable with, you can own that. And that really sets the precedent in your classroom that people should apologize when they mess up or when they mistreat others. People reflect on their behaviors. They continually try to do better because they care about those around them. That's being a warm demander. That's something you want to model for your kids. So don't be afraid to experiment. Notice what works and pay attention to why certain things work and certain other things don't. Notice which kids respond to which strategies. It's all part of being a warm demander. Now, there's obviously a lot more that I could say about this topic, but all kinds of information about being a warm demander is available online if you want to learn more. What I want to return to is the part that I said in the beginning about why I think this is such a great goal to strive for as a teacher. Being a warm demander allows you to focus more on who you are, how you show up in the classroom, rather than getting caught up in students' frustrating behaviors or their failure to meet learning goals. This is about thinking about who you are as a person in the classroom, the way you show up, your personality, your attitude, your enthusiasm. If you pity your students or you don't believe in them, then trying to be a warm demander will come across as fake. And if you think you're a bad teacher and you don't have confidence in your own abilities, it's not going to work either. They're not going to take you seriously when you're insistent that they rise to your expectations. But when you establish the right mindset, the right beliefs about yourself and your students, becoming more of a warm demander comes naturally. You'll notice that the warm demander approach kind of feels effortless after a while because you're coming into the classroom really being yourself. And in those moments when you don't feel like you're being yourself, when you're being cold or angry or impatient or aggravated, you know how to self-correct at that point, and you'll know how to get back on track. Remember that the only person that you can change is yourself. You can't change your students, and you don't need to. When you get frustrated, refocus on the person that you want to be each day for your kids and expend your energy on being that person, that awesome teacher and supportive adult in their life, rather than trying to get the kids to become that awesome student that you wish they would be. This isn't about blaming yourself or putting all the responsibility on you for kids to be engaged. Being a warm demander is an empowering stance where you realize the tremendous influence that just your demeanor in the classroom can have on your students, and how small shifts in your tone and your facial expression can really make a huge difference in your interactions. Being a warm demander helps you show up in the classroom as the best version of yourself. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.